General reminders for Module 3 assignments. If you need some more time, please take a one-pager, lots of references, lots of examples for your advocacy document. Completing your power mapping plan, being able to get all of that done together. Again, if you need some more time, just some gentle reminders on that. We're here to work you and support you through this progress. Module 4 after today, after a heavy sigh, but also a reflection on life, you get to write an op-ed or a memo, whatever best suits you. Take some time to make that update because you actually have a couple weeks to get that done, as well as to update your elevator pitch. We'll be providing feedback by the end of this week, hopefully approximately, to those who turned it in on time, and I'll make sure to try to get those who need a couple more days to be able to get those feedback as well. So some of the highlights for reminders and things to keep top of mind. For today's session, again, sitting in onto the topic of what Tatenda was really passionate about and sort of being able to celebrate her, we're looking at ways for us to be able to improve the scientific literacy and public engagement, and what better place to start with at a local level. So we're looking at some case studies, some examples, ways to create impact, and really digging deep into the experiences both of our incredibly talented and long legacy impact creators with Adriana and Jamie, who I'll introduce briefly soon. There will be some independent and some group work. Again, if you need to take some time out after that heavy start, I don't blame you. I am struggling to deal with this myself, and I can only laugh out of anxiety because that's really all I can do. So with that, then I'm going to transition to introducing our speakers today. Today, we're joined by Adriana Bankston. She is the co-director of this course, and she's not joining us today per se as a co-director. She's actually putting on her other hat for a senior fellow through the Civic and Science Public Policy program through the Sigma Psi. And Adriana has worked for many, many years to foster the future of the US in science and technology by supporting the next generation of scientists in their research endeavors through nonprofit organizations and scientific societies like the National Postdoctoral Association, American Society for Cell Biology, Future of Research, and Society for Neuroscience, just to name a few. And Adriana continues to highlight the importance of federally funded research in society and engage with early career researchers in science policy through innovative programs and tools and organizations. She serves as the CEO and managing publisher of the Journal of Science Policy and Governments. And as part of the AAAS Section X Steering Group, she also is, through the Senior Fellowship of Sigma Psi, is able to continue to build those tools. In fact, they did a boot camp that just wrapped up last week. And really, in conclusion, she's incredibly instrumental in the science policy programming with UCI, and all the programming that we get to engage with and enjoy and learn from throughout the last few weeks and moving forward, none of that would be possible without Adriana, with her expertise, time, and support. So we're incredibly glad to have her sit on the other side once again and join us for today's session. Next we have, and Jamie will actually be starting us off. Jamie is the Executive Director and CEO of Sigma Psi, as well as publisher for American Scientist. Jamie Vernon has been a Sigma Psi member since 2014, and starting off through the Director of Science of Communication and Publications today, as well as Editor-in-Chief in the Society's magazines, American Scientist. Dr. Jamie Vernon has also served as an interim co-director of operations of Sigma Psi, and currently as the director of science communications and publications. He has managed the publication, content, finances, operations for Sigma Psi, you name it, everything he has touched. And regularly has communicated with its over 100,000 of members. So as the editor-in-chief of the American Scientist, he has overseen publication of bi-monthly science magazines with tons and tons of print circulating, from 50,000 to 250,000 of unique online visitors monthly. If you can list it in terms of the track record and legacy that Adriana and Jamie can provide in terms of improving scientific literacy and increasing public engagement, you have it all here. So I'm incredibly pleased to be able to pass this along. You can read more about them. I'll send them in the chat soon, and I'll pass the screen share to Adriana and Jamie.
Thank you, Joanne. Well, I was planning to introduce Jamie, but you did a great job, so we can just move right along. I will tell you that Jamie was a AAAS fellow in relation to the science policy content here, and also an ORISE fellow, so you can ask him questions about those and his transition. So Jamie, it's your.
Thanks, Adriana, and thank you all for having me today. Coming to you from Research Triangle Park, North Carolina. That's where Sigma Xi headquarters is based, not in Washington, D.C. But I'd like to just take a minute to acknowledge the opening and the recognition of Tatenda. I think that it's important that we all take into account that the work that you're doing today and this conversation today is really part of her vision. I mean, if she was a part of this group, then I think she shared all of the interests and the goals that you do. And when I heard Joanne say that she was focused on the beauty of solutions, it tells you what kind of person she was. She really viewed this from her heart. I didn't know her, but just hearing the obituary and some and her quotes, it was revealing of the passion she had for this. And I imagine the passion you all share. Many people that I find in science communication and policy are drawn to the field because they care deeply about people and serving humanity. And the fact that you all have the acumen and the capability not only to succeed in science and develop your scientific skills, but then to think about how to translate that to serve society is something you should all be proud of in yourselves, and we should all celebrate Tatenda for that. So thank you, Joanne, for the few minutes that we had to think about her. And to be honest, everyone should have just that brief moment to think about their lives. I think if we all are given a chance to think about our friends, our family, just for a minute, it reminds us why we're here and what we're doing. So thank you, Joanna, and thank you for having me here today. And I appreciate the introduction. It's interesting to hear people talk about the things that I've done, and we just wrapped up last week the Sigma Xi Science Policy Boot Camp, which is a state level science policy boot camp where you learn about policy in the state of North Carolina, but it's really a program to introduce anyone to policy that happens at the state and local level, so you can have a better understanding of how you can translate your research not only at the federal level, where a lot of people focus. Not only do you often focus on the federal, but you often focus on federal and legislative branch. And we hope today and in the conversation we have that you will gain a broader understanding of the impact that policy can have at every level, from federal all the way down to your local school or your homeowners association. Policy is really everywhere. And as scientists, we have an opportunity to bring a unique perspective to all of those levels of government. I was a AAAS fellow many years ago. At this point, more than a decade ago, and that's surprising to think about. But that decision to become a policy fellow, AAAS policy fellow, was a big one for me. And I'm sure many of you have wrestled with this decision about remaining in science or jumping ship and taking that leap of faith and going into policy full time. So in addition to thinking about the levels at which you can enter government, there's also something you should be thinking about, which is to what extent do you want to dedicate your life to policy? Some of you will want to remain as academic researchers or industry researchers, but your expertise, you will know, is relevant in the policy sphere. And because of that expertise, you're going to want to know how to lend yourself to state governments, local governments, federal governments. And those are things you should explore for yourself, and hopefully will open your eyes to some of the opportunities today about how you can do that. And others who maybe feel that they've made their contributions in science, but they feel they can do more or better by fully committing to policy and going to first be a fellow, which is usually a one-year appointment, and then ultimately seeking a full-time policy position. And so that's the range of policy engagement. You can lend your expertise to the government, or you could go fully into government and become a federal employee or a state employee and work full-time on policy. And it's very difficult to navigate all of those different axes, the levels of government and the amount of time you want to spend in policy is something that I think it would be helpful if you had some tools to help you to make those decisions as to what you're going to do. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about what you can do at the state and local level. So next slide, Adriana. You know, the role of scientists, as you know, is expanding beyond the bench. You probably, even while you're working in your laboratories or in the field or however you, or on your computers doing your research, have thought about, well, how does this connect to the rest of the world? And reality is that policy is one way that you can do that. And so state and local level engagement presents this new and potentially unique opportunities for more accessible options for researchers and students. Next slide. In addition to what you can contribute to policy, engaging in policy can also improve research culture and society. I believe that when you actually connect your science to the broader community, you learn what you would like to see within the scientific community as well. So by participating, by bridging science and policy, you can understand how to improve research culture and what things you would like to see. Let's just talk about diversity, for example. When you're engaging in policy, you're going to be connecting with people that may or may not look like you. You're going to be serving people that may or may not look like you, and you're going to come to understand the challenges of all communities. And when you look back at the scientific community, you're going to ask, are those people represented here? And how can I make science reflect the society that's around me? And I think that can lead to tremendous cultural change. In terms of civic science, it's really defined as broad public engagement around issues that arise at the intersections between science and society. So there's this concept, I'm not sure if this is a new term for you, but there's a concept of a civic scientist today that's emerging. And what does that mean? What does it mean to be a civic scientist? It's really about being a scientist who is bridging these two worlds, science and society. And there's a major effort underway to introduce this concept and into science culture and to build a community of civic scientists. So at Sigma Xi and with Adriana's help, we encourage the use of science to develop solutions for societal challenges at the state and local level. And I think this goes back to Tatenda's quote, what can we do as scientists to serve our communities? Next slide. So then there's the benefits of engaging at the local level, and the benefits of are directly to local communities by addressing state and local needs. You know, many of us are inundated by the news cycle that we hear either on NPR when we're working in the lab and we've got that radio blasting, or when we turn on our TVs and we see cable news reports about denial of climate change, or you know, ignoring the theory of evolution or denying it. And so local and state level is a little bit different. It's really those things that affect us on a daily basis. The water that you drink, the pothole that you hit on your way to work. How can we address these things through science? How can we use science to make our state and our local communities more effective and more efficient at addressing problems? You can also, at the local level, engage historically marginalized groups. And this can be Native Americans, it can be you know, of any variety of groups who've been left out of science and in many ways left out of policy. And so by engaging at the local level, you really can serve those communities directly and create opportunities to overcome barriers to getting involved. One of the things that I've said about what Sigma's Eye is trying to do in the local and state level policy arena is empower people to understand how to engage in the policy process in order to create a system that works for them. And so if we talk about changing the culture of science, oftentimes that's about human to human interaction and these very difficult conversations that require cultural changes. But if you understand the policy process, you can actually implement policies that advance the goals that you have for your science community or your state or local community. I'm looking at the questions here. How does civic science differ from science diplomacy? That's really interesting. So civic science is slightly different from diplomacy because we're not talking necessarily about international engagement. So civic science is literally what's happening in your backyard and how can you connect science to that. Civic science can be engaging in the policy process at any level, but it's really about more domestic issues. Science diplomacy usually involves using science to build or advance relationships between international communities. So hopefully that was helpful. Finally, achieving more impact at the state and local levels on issues of interest. When you're engaging at the state and local level, you can talk to your parents, your aunt, your uncle, your grandmother, your brother, your sister, people who are directly affected and have concerns right there in your neighborhood. And so by engaging at these levels, you're really going to be addressing and demonstrating the power of science to those that are immediately in your proximity. Okay, next slide. So there are a variety of ways that you can engage at the state and local level. Some of you are probably familiar with the Federal Register. That's basically an announcement board for policies that the federal government is considering implementing, and they make a call for the public to comment on these future policies. This also happens at the state and local level. So oftentimes at your community town halls and your community boards will have public opportunities for public comments. And that's your opportunity as a scientist to bring your analytical skills to those opportunities. They might ask, how should we, or they may say, we're planning on building a park in this area. And maybe because of your environmental biology training, you would have some comment on the potential of that park to affect an endangered or threatened species in your state. So public comments are an opportunity for you to directly share your knowledge with the decision makers. You can serve on an advisory panel. These can be panels stood up by nonprofits, by your local governments, or by the state government. You can engage with state or local legislators. Oftentimes, they are looking for experts in certain areas. If there's a piece of energy legislation that's going through the legislature, they might, if you can contribute to that, they may lend an ear to you to hear what your thoughts would be and what the potential impact of this legislation is. You could testify in state and local hearings. I can tell you one of my first experiences in science policy was testifying in front of the Texas State Board of Education. At the time there was an effort underway to remove evolution, the teaching of evolution from textbooks in Texas. And if you know anything about STEM education and textbooks, Texas is one of the largest purchasers of textbooks. So whatever they buy is usually the same textbook that other states would buy because it becomes cheaper and it becomes the one that's most commonly used across the country. So it was really important for those of us who lived in Texas to actually go and testify and try to overturn this effort to remove evolution, and not just evolution, but the age of the universe from our physics textbooks. Imagine that. So that was one of the issues that initially brought me into policy. And so maybe some of you are facing these in your state. Obviously, there's a number of state decisions currently that are not necessarily evidence-based, and you could contribute. So working for state or local governments, you can do this full time. And this is what I was saying, if you're practicing scientist, you may not want to take on a full-time position, but if you're exploring career paths, working in the state and local government is a great option. Volunteering with state or local nonprofits. It's really interesting that there's nonprofits all around you, surely, in your communities, who are making decisions and engaging on policy, and no one in that nonprofit has a science degree. And imagine the capacity that you could add by being the one scientist who's sitting at the table with these nonprofits who may be trying to address urban poverty or food deserts, or a variety of things in their communities, and they have no access to scientists. So maybe you could be the person who brings that to that particular nonprofit. And finally, the ultimate engagement in policy is to run for public office. I know several people who have run for office, some of whom have actually won and been elected, and some who haven't. But in all cases, they learned so much about their communities, and also the appreciation that many communities have for science. And those who do succeed and actually attain those public offices have tremendous opportunities, obviously, to lend their training to the legislation that gets through their governing bodies. I'm going to look over here at the questions. Is citizenship permanent residency a requisite for engagement with state and local legislators? No. If you are a citizen of a community, you obviously have a stake in how that community is run. And if anything, you can share that unique perspective to your legislators. So I definitely encourage that, regardless of your background. If you're in the United States on a visa and you're legally here, you have every reason to engage and make your interests known to your legislators. And I see someone responded to that. Okay, next slide. So here's some examples of organizations at the state and local level. Engineers and scientists acting locally, also known as ESAL. They're based in California, but they serve scientists all over the country, and they provide training and resources to anyone who's interested in engaging at that level. In California, there's also the California Council on Science and Technology. CCST is really the model program for a lot of state fellowships that are being created at the moment. I don't know how familiar you are with the state fellowships that are cropping up all over the country, but I guess there's more than 10 states now that have fellows. North Carolina, where I'm based, has a state fellows program. We call it a STEM program for political reasons, I believe, because we have an Office of Science and Technology Innovation in the state, and I think STEM sort of gives it a different nature. But our fellows tend to be placed in the executive branch. Some fellows, depending on the state, are based in the legislative branch of government. And so exploring those different fellowships gives you an opportunity to figure out where you would want to be in the government. And these fellowships have many different structures. Some are managed by third-party nonprofits. Some are organized by universities. Some are organized by state academies of science in the various states. So there's a variety of different models for these fellowships. And so you can explore the different models and figure out which ones work for you. State academies, I mentioned, some of the state academies are hosts for the state level fellowships. But state academies are also becoming a resource, or have been a resource, to state governments. If you think about the National Academy of Science and their role in advising the federal government on on science policy issues, the state academies can play that role. And what's interesting is not all the state academies have this capacity at the moment. So depending on what state you're in, you may be the person that could help initiate or bring that capacity to your state academy. identifying who is the president, or if you have an executive director of the state academy, reaching out to them and asking them if they have a policy program, you could ultimately become the catalyst for initiating science policy at the state level in your state. I can tell you that I'm actively trying to build a network of academies that are interested in engaging in state level policy, and you would be an asset to that. Then, as I mentioned, the state fellowships are in different models. And then there's numerous science policy groups on university campuses. We have them not associated with institutions within some states. There's the National Science Policy Network, there's ESEP, there's a variety of networks that you could tap into, all of which are trying to maintain and build their state policy networks. Other organizations, the Expert and Citizen Assessment of Science and Technology. Many of you may not know about the former technology assessment capability of the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House. But when that assessment element was removed from Office of Science and Technology Policy, this group, ECAST, is trying to step in and replace that or serve that role, which is to give citizens, regular citizens, the opportunity to comment on emerging technologies and emerging science. So they usually have roundtables of individuals, all from the community, with the scientists representing an area of science or a new emerging technology. Artificial intelligence would be a good example. And they basically have conversations about what are the implications of this technology. Autonomous vehicles is a good one. Am I going to be safe if we have 100% saturation of autonomous vehicles? Those types of conversations are really important to educating and informing the public about what the capabilities of science and technology are. Sigma Xi chapters. So as the executive director of Sigma Xi, I have to mention our Sigma Xi chapters, and some of our chapters are engaged in science policy. So if you're a member of Sigma Xi, you can ask your chapter if they do any science policy, and if they don't, then maybe you could be the person that helps them start a science policy project. Thriving Earth Exchange is a program run by the American Geophysical Union, and this is really about community science. So engaging the community while you're thinking about research projects. So if you are a scientist who's working on projects that have direct relevance to certain communities, having them involved in the process of what science needs to be conducted, who needs to be a part of that science, who are the interests that we're actually trying to serve. Thriving Earth is really doing this in a great way around environmental issues and climate change. Okay, next slide. Here are some other examples of impactful local participation. Chris Takita was interned for a state representative, so this is an option you could always do. It's a little tougher for a grad student to do this, but if you have a summer and you have some time, you could intern with your state representative. Yasmin Hussein was a program officer at the Washington State Academy of Sciences. Again, there's a State Academy of Science that really does play the role of advising the state government, and being a program officer in such an academy would really introduce you to a lot of opportunities and ways to apply your science policy. Andrew George worked here at Sigma Xi with me recently as a civic science fellow, but prior to that, he actually was involved in the development of the North Carolina STEM Policy Fellowship. Interestingly, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation funded a series of assessments to determine whether or not certain states would be appropriate for establishing policy fellowships. And Andrew did a lot of the footwork, engaging with legislators and federal state agencies, as well as nonprofits, including Sigma Xi. And he was there figuring out how would a STEM policy fellowship work. And ultimately, we established one in the state, and the North Carolina Sea Grant actually is the administrator of that grant. Sigma Xi was considering it, but ultimately the Sea Grant took the program, and Sea Grant came back to Sigma Xi and asked us to develop an orientation for the fellows, which is what led to the establishment of the Sigma Xi state level science policy boot camp. Our boot camp is the orientation for the North Carolina STEM policy fellows, but we opened it up to all Sigma Xi members as well as other scientists interested in policy. And then Tepring Piquato ran for public office, and she now works for essentially a legislative engagement organization and does some lobbying. So she's had an interesting career. Next slide. So all this is to say, science policy is a promising area for you to conduct civic engagement. And then, you really need to decide, in addition to the level of government, how much time you want to put into your policy, you will need to decide what type of work you want to do. Do you want to work on science for policy or policy for science? So let's break that down. If you're in this program, you're probably familiar with these terms, but science for policy is when you're actually using your expertise or research that you're aware of to improve policy. So make them more evidence-based so that they're drawing from a knowledge base that is likely to yield the results that the policy is intended to deliver. Policy for science is when you're really engaging with legislators or agencies, executive branch agencies, on how science is going to be conducted in your state. So who's going to get the funding, what projects are going to be funded, and those types of things. What constraints and regulations do we put on that research? So those are two different areas of policy that you might be working in, and you probably want to think deeply about which one you want to be working on. And then the engagement options or the roles that you can play in policy include the following. Issue advocates. These are folks who have identified a policy solution that they really think is the appropriate solution, and they're at the legislator advocating for that policy to be adopted. And that has its own skills and limitations for what type of work you'll be doing. An honest broker is a scientist who basically says, I'm going to review all of this science and help you determine which one is reliable. And then a science arbiter is one who's really going to be playing less of a role in the policy space and just identifying really good science. And a pure scientist, although they don't think that they're involved in policy, the work that they do, if their research does not advance in a certain direction, they're going to be tremendously affected by future funding possibilities. So you have a stake in the policy decisions that will come regardless of how pure you think you are as a scientist. Okay. Now, here's some specific examples of how you can become an issue advocate. The American Society for Microbiology offers provides a website, how to find and become engaged in on-campus advocacy. So you can go to this website if you're an ASM member, and you can actually search through a variety of on-campus advocacy opportunities. Megan Domingo, who was a student in North Carolina, actually, we reached out to her, we found her to bring on to our science policy project here at Sigma Xi. So once you put yourself out there, you can be discovered by those in your state who are doing science policy. Next issue, or next slide, is the honest broker role. And what's interesting is probably every state has a similar story, but North Carolina has 350 statewide boards and commissions. And this has more than 600 appointments that expire every year. And if you don't think that there are vacancies on these commissions, then you really don't understand how ineffective the government is in reaching out to the scientific community. So if you just go to the next slide, you'll see I searched for the word science under current openings. And here we are. The Science and Technology and Innovation Board has all these openings right now. I could apply for them and serve on the North Carolina Science, Technology, and Innovation Board. Now, obviously, there's going to be requirements. There's some that are very specific, like you have to be at an HBCU or you have to be at a specific university and nominated by the president of the university. Others, like the at-large, maybe that's just any scientist. And that would be interesting to find out what the opportunities are. But if you have a database like this in your state, you might want to look for those opportunities. And if you're not qualified now, knowing about that opportunity is great for when you do qualify. So some of them may require you to be a faculty member or at a higher level of scientific training. And knowing that those opportunities are there is a great way to get prepare yourself to lend yourself to the state government. And these are the types of examples I was mentioning earlier where they probably are looking for active researchers to fill these positions, not for you to be a full-time state government employee. Let me look at this. Do you know if this is the same for all states? I'm not sure. I'm sure that there are lots of commissions and boards and advisory panels. I'm not sure if you have a database like this to search, but I imagine that all states have vacancies, openings on those committees. Could you provide the link for this? Yes, I'll drop that in when Adriana is talking in a few. Oh, Nathan got it, I think. Okay, next slide. So here's an example of one of the actual opportunities I was just showing you. And I love the purpose. It's to advise and make recommendations to the governor, the General Assembly, the Secretary of Commerce, and any North Carolina nonprofit corporation with which the Department of Commerce contracts pursuant to this law on the role of science, technology, and innovation in the economic growth and development of North Carolina. How many of us would like to be in that position? Providing advice and making recommendations to these high-level decision makers. I think we would all enjoy that opportunity. So, look in your state, see what the requirements are, and see if you can find one of these positions. Okay, next is the science arbiter, pure scientist role. In North Carolina, we don't have a CCST, but we do have the North Carolina Collaboratory, which plays this role as a scientific research expertise for policy making. And this really was established just a few years ago in 2016 to disseminate the research expertise across the University of North Carolina system. So this is limited in some way to only faculty at universities of North Carolina. But what they do is they get funding from the state legislature to solve or do research on state problems that the state needs evidence for. So one of the examples here is the North Carolina Flood Resiliency Hub and the Opioid Abatement and Recovery Research Program. So let's look at what that looks like. Next slide. So Tony Sebastian, who's an assistant professor at UNC Chapel Hill, developed this North Carolina Flood Resiliency Hub, and she actually presented this to members of a congressional delegation, state legislators, and local elected officials in Greenville, North Carolina in 2021. So she created this map that provides flood information to the state-led decision makers. And that was all funded through the North Carolina Collaboratory. Similarly, the Opioid Abatement and Recovery Research Program, I know it's difficult to read, but they're giving out grants of around $300,000 or more to develop research projects around how we're going to solve this problem in the state. So it's a really nice organization, the Collaboratory, and they do leverage the expertise within the state. Looking at the questions over here. Good. Thank you, Joanne, for dropping in the link to the Collaboratory. So these are some very real world examples of how we can provide our expertise to state and local governments. And you can see some states have really excellent tools and resources for you to find these opportunities. And hopefully this has been insightful for you. So next slide. Question is, how do you know where you're going to fit in? I've just given you all these great examples. Based on the training you're going to get to receive this certificate, this really exciting certificate in policy, you're going to want to know where to go apply that. And so that's what Adriana and I have been working on, and she's going to take you through the next phase of this to show you what we're trying to do to help scientists in North Carolina and hopefully eventually in the future across the nation figure out how they're going to participate in state level policy. So thank you for your time, and I'll be here throughout the rest of the talk, so feel free to ask me any questions.
Thank you, Jamie. Great introduction. There are a few more questions in the chat. I think maybe if you can answer also while I'm speaking, if you can ask Jamie more questions. A lot of interest in this, so great to see. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the digital platform that we're working on, as building on what Jamie said and why we think this is needed and what we're trying to do. So one is, what we found is at the state level, there are a lot of players, but they don't always work together. They don't always know that other folks are in this space. So part of what we're doing is we want to create a space where everything is easier to find, also for all of you who are looking for these opportunities. This is going to be sort of a one-stop shop where you can go to create the centralized resource for folks, including students and fellows and trainees who want to engage. As Jamie said, states are a good entry point for your career in policy and engaging in a lot of different ways that we'll talk about a little bit of what we're working on here. Part of the goal is to connect users, so students and other folks here, all of you guys should engage with the platform, with professionals and learning about what opportunities are there. We're working on also identifying partners that can suggest and input their opportunities. We'll have case studies and individuals you can connect to, and providing also recommendations tailored to you and really what you're interested in getting from the platform. There's a few onboarding questions, and then really getting to what you're interested in working on in policy, and you'll see tailored opportunities. As Jamie said, we are starting with North Carolina. We would like to expand nationwide and have really a lot of different opportunities. Really creating also a community around this, and also breaking down barriers to access, again, for folks who may not have opportunities in policy. Maybe you're not in really highly populated parts of the country, even internationally. I think if you want to come to the US and engage here, I know there's folks here who are not from the US. So that's helpful to see what's here and what you can do, as someone mentioned, that it's not citizenship limited. And we want to raise awareness of what we're doing also. So we've written a few blog posts about what the platform is, which I think Joanna may have shared. One is for SciTech Forefront, the other one is for Inside Higher Ed. And we're also going around to give presentations like this to talk about what we're doing to get people excited before we launch it later this year. And of course, the certificate program is a large sort of tool for this to show you what you can do more practically, and engage partnerships. Again, if you all have ideas or organizations that you think should engage, that would be helpful as well. So the goal is to foster collaborations between scientists and policymakers to address the needs of communities. Again, this can be at a number of levels, and really trying to get at, there's a lot of folks that don't have opportunities in policy, and you all are here. We provided this for you with Sigma Xi being involved as well. But again, there's a lot of folks who aren't here. They don't know that these things exist. So there's a large need to create this community. We are also, as I said, we will be trying to match the users with science policy trainings. And it's really an exploration tool for you all to go through and find the things you're interested in, connect with folks who are in those spaces, again, through case studies, and be able to read about professionals who are in these spaces. And part of this is, and what we want to do is think about how these opportunities are in the platform, but then how can you connect with folks and also train for these, sort of having the training component of if you're interested in specific opportunities, and Jamie showed you a few examples, where would I go to do that? Who's working on those things? How do I get trained for them? And all of that. So more to come. This is really tailored to help you both educate yourself on science policy opportunities and go through different things you can be doing, but also think about meaningful action, right? As we discussed in the introduction, whether it's an advisory role, which kind of branch of government do you want to involve yourself in, what level, and where do you want to plug into this? So there'll be a number of touch points. I'll show you a few screens that we have, but we want to cover the different branches of government and show you different options. And benefiting, of course, all of you here are in science or research, envisioning this to be different types of policy. And so, of course, we're thinking through science policy, but there's also interest in folks who are in other disciplines, which I know some folks here are. Ideally would also engage in other areas of policy. And again, it's focused on state and local level. So we're going to do this for maybe 10 minutes or so. I wanted to just show you what we're thinking. And this is a work in progress, but would love your input as folks who would be using the platform. If you have comments for us, this is a great opportunity to see, tell us what you like and what you'd like to see. So just a few onboarding menus, and these are in process, so will likely change. But the idea is that you can create an account, very easy. It's just a online website. It'll ask about your career stage and then how you want to engage. And again, these may change, but the idea is just a little basic information about you, where you're coming from, what you're interested in, what you want to engage in. And then there'll be a number of filters to go through where you can choose, I want to engage in science or policy, I want to work in the executive branch, and so on. And then you'll get to a number of opportunities. Again, there'll be different menus that'll help you tailor and nail down a little bit more. And you'll get to this, this window, which again is one of the options. But the idea is to, one, be able to go through identifying a policy opportunity, develop it, and then implement it. You can see this roadmap here has different sectors and branches of government, right? So you have legislative, Senate and House, judicial and executive, and then you can sort of follow this around. You have NGOs, industry, and these are just a few options. And then you can click on specific nodes, right? So for example, if I'm interested in advisory committees, which is on the right, bottom right here, what kinds of things do I need to do for that? What skills do I need to develop? What resources are there for me? Who's on this committee? Can I talk to somebody who's there? And then again, the last piece is sort of the training side of this. So this is broken down by a lot of categories, as you can see here, but it'll give you a roadmap and exploring different opportunities and ways that you can engage in the different things that exist out there. So I think that's it for this section. Let me see if there's, let me just stop sharing for a second. Any specific input about the platform? Looks like it's, you all are interested in this, like the subway style map. Thank you. Anyone want to speak up and give any verbal feedback? Good or bad, we're open to improvements, and what you like and you don't like. Just take a few minutes to do this before we move on to the activity. Yeah, so I'll try to answer some of these. Select several options. So does it force you to pick one? So you can pick one question. This is something I think we're still working at, but the idea is that you can make it tailored, but then you can also go back to the main window and sort of see all the options. So you'll have kind of both ways to do that. If you want to get very specific, you can do that, and also depends on the filters that you set. It's broader or narrow. There's something else here. Include undergrads and grads. Yes, that's something we can separate out. Additional questions? Yeah, so there's a lot of other questions and windows I didn't show you. This is just the basics. So we're not spending the whole hour talking about this, but just to give you a little flavor of what it is. Joanne is laughing at me.
We have a hand raised, by the way.
Yes. Go ahead, Yusuf. Go ahead.
Yes, madam. My concern is, thank you, first of all. I have gained a lot of knowledge there. My concern is, what's the difference between political science and civic science?
Oh, that's a question for Jamie. You want to answer that one?
Yeah, well, they're very connected. Political science is more of an academic field that's primarily focused on the study of policy and politics. Civic science is more about science that's being connected to the broader community. Political science is where you're going to learn about legislation, how policy is made, and that sort of thing. Civic science is more of a cultural concept that is science integrated with your community and society.
Okay, so I see more questions. So yeah, there's some clarification as to what the career stages are. That will not stay as it is right now. We'll have early, mid, late career. But yes, I can see how that can be confusing. Well, good to hear. There's generally a lot of interest in this, so we're excited to see that. I'm gonna move on to actually try to do maybe a quick activity, a little more practical, related to public engagement. And this is not something you can sort of dabble with this. It's not something we'll grade you on, but we wanted to give you a flavor of how you can actually apply this to a real world problem. We used to do a whole module on this and really in depth. So this is kind of a quick snapshot here today. But we do have the videos from prior years online too, if you want to look more. One question, and this is something that, you know, I could see a lot of trainees wanting to obviously apply this to a specific policy they're interested in, and give you some of that opportunity. So if you're to develop a public engagement plan on your issue, and I'll show you an example. And these principles are really helpful, I think, for any policy development, but thinking through the scope of the project, right? So why you're doing this, what will happen if what you're proposing actually happens. A lot of questions about what are the limitations, what can I achieve, but a lot of times in policy, it's, you know, how much will it cost, how much time will it cost me, what resources do I have or do I not have, what barriers are there, and these are all things to consider when you're trying to develop a local policy or any policy. Key stakeholders, again, depending on who your audience is. So if it's the public, if it's your local community, you know, you're trying to appeal to a local board, for example, something like that. The pitch will be different depending on who you're talking to and who is impacted. Think through, you know, if I create this policy, who will be impacted positively or negatively. Establishing objectives, this is pretty self-explanatory. What kind of outcomes can come from this? What's the best possible outcomes? What's the worst? What's in the middle? What's a reasonable sort of middle ground? Metrics and targets. Well, you need this for everything. It really depends on really the specific question that you have. I'll give you an example for this, but these are good things to keep in mind as we move through the rest of the program too. Timeline with milestones is also helpful. So having something in mind about when would you like to accomplish this by, what kind of things do I need to do in the next 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, so on. The channels also, of course, this is also, do I want to do this, you know, through a board or something like that, right? Do I want to do it on social media? Do I approach my local legislator? There's a whole different options here to think through. And then you want to promote what you're doing as well to the community, right? If you're trying to reach the public and folks who are really close to your community, that's helpful to be able to show who you are, what you're interested in, and what you're promoting in different ways. You should be flexible too. So a lot of times things might change, right? So you may have people that supported you, maybe they have other priorities now, always being on the lookout for who to approach. Being able to plan some events, right? So a lot of this happens maybe through local events, just making sure that those happen, or being cognizant of what might happen. Not all the things that you planned you might be able to do, but some of the things can help you achieve what you want. And then post-engagement plan, which is, if this all happens, what will I do after? Is there follow-up? How do I report back to the audience? So the example, and this is a good website, basically, where this resource comes from, NaturalQuest. The reporting back the results of what you achieved and how it helps your community. So either long-term planning, what your next steps will be, or reporting back to the community that you're serving. So I'll give you one example. I know this is a quick run through here. Yes.
Sorry. Please excuse me. May you go back to the previous slide? There's a concern I want to raise.
Yeah, sorry, let me see if I can. This one?
And so, yeah, and now would you mind to shed light on what choosing metrics and targets there, please, in line with also identifying key stakeholders?
Yeah, so let me see here. So key stakeholders, and you can review more at the link also. So key stakeholders, I would say, like, who is being impacted by your decision, whether it's like your local government, school, is it citizens who are working in your space? It really depends on the problem. So I'll show you one specific example. Maybe you'll get an idea from that, but sort of like thinking through who's impacted by the policy. Metrics and targets also depends on the project. So let's see here. Something that's easy to track, for example, if you're in a campaign, how many people are you engaging with, demographics, diversity of people that are engaged in your initiative and participating, and also other kinds of things like votes, how many people commented or engaged in your events, and so on. There's just broadly a few ideas there. But let me just show you this one example. So this is an example from a few years ago, which I think Joanne can share the link to this, where we had the students go through a project of their choice and go through this exercise. So we'll do that a little bit here. Probably won't have as much time as I thought we did, but just it's still helpful to think through this problem, and you'll have the document. So their plan was informal senior citizen science education. They wanted to increase scientific literacy for senior citizens through informal science education programming. The audience was American adults age 65 and up who have low scientific literacy. So that's interesting because, and you can see sort of the different windows here. So what is the scope? Who's the audience? Justification. Why am I doing this? Why is it important? Because they don't have really a lot of scientific knowledge. They believe science is important, but they need to hear more and learn about why they should engage. Informal science education is a field in itself. And then they also apparently are the most dedicated voting age demographic in the United States. I didn't know that. So it's very important for them to understand how policies impact them because they're voting too. The approach that they suggested was to run some programs through local senior centers. That makes sense. And you can see here they laid out a nice strategy about what this would look like and the timeline. So begin programming through local centers, create science lesson plans, taking into account what the citizens are interested in, right? That's very important. Again, going back to the audience. These are just a few things that they might be interested in, right? So if they're watching the news, that's a way to hook them and something they might be interested in engaging with. Connecting to their grandkids, what's relevant to them or their friends. So you can sort of imagine that they would be discussing these things with friends or folks in their neighborhood, right? So those things, it's good to know what that is. And then try to create programs around that. Being inclusive of folks who have limited mobility or vision. And then also, how do we engage older Americans, right? Instructional YouTube videos, that's an idea. And hosting specific sessions for skills, also a good idea. So a lot of different options here and things that can be done. And you can see they have a few months timeline here from October 2021 to March 2022. So the idea is to find where these senior centers are, find scientists who can volunteer, build a social media presence, going back to the marketing side, start programming in January, and then do a couple of months of that and in March evaluate it. So it's pretty easy. This is the sort of thing you can try in your community. I think that was a good example and pretty concrete.
Please
And
excuse me,
then,
madam.
of course,
Hello.
hold on, just want to get through the slide. So then they went through the limitations that they may not be able to find partners who are interested, volunteers, of course, getting people to volunteer, and then designing the content and who to recruit for that. Post-engagement plan is monitoring what kind of trends are coming out of this, how effective is the content, and sharing the plan with other groups to inspire additional programs and so on. So it's a good example to think through an issue that's relatively simple, but hopefully can engage these folks in science. So yeah, go ahead and ask your question now.
Hello, madam. Please go back to the scoop where we had a scoop.
Yes. Sorry. Scope?
Yeah. Now I'm seeing like the scoop now is more like the purpose or the goal. According to the statement given there, increase the scientific literacy.
Yeah,
it's more like
the scope, that's a good question. So let me see here. I think the scope, they define sort of
goal like or purpose.
like who are they trying to reach? So senior citizens, informal programming. So if you had a different scope, you could be, young people, right? Or you want to involve them in formal education, right? So that's a little bit more nuanced to a specific group and one type of education, I can say. So it's not too broad, right? You don't want to say like we want to teach people how to get into science, that's too broad. So it's a little bit more specific. And if you go to this link, MetroQuest, you can read about what they're saying there more about that particular part of it. So now if we have some time, so 1 of 25 minutes, maybe we can do maybe 10 minutes to get you a little bit into the thinking through the public engagement plan. And then we'll come back and discuss. And just want to show you, since we're wrapping up here, the resources we used today. I think we shared some of these with you. You have the slides as well. And then I'll remind you to connect with us and with Sigma Xi and all of our channels. We're here to be a resource for you, and hopefully we give you a good background today. So if we have a little time, I think we can do maybe 10 minutes of activity.
Yeah, I sent out the activity document in the chat. Would you still like them to jump into groups or have them work on it individually?
Yes, if you can, so I just want to give you a little time to think through an issue and start to think about these questions. Again, we won't grade you, but it's a good way to think about developing a policy problem and solution with a more specific scope. And you can sort of use this to guide your future assignments too. Sorry, we don't have more time for this, but I saw some good ideas. Does anybody want to share anything from the room? Maybe a couple folks.
So our team name was the Brainy Bunch, and our project title was to establish a council to perform stakeholders analysis and develop a biological framework for the research and development of AI. So our scope concerned itself with establishing legislative committee tasked with developing the comprehensive policy framework to govern the research, development, and usage of biological AI, inclusive of ethical, societal, economic, and technological considerations. We narrowed down our audience to bioethicists and legislators that have ties to either the AI security committee or to biological research working groups. The justification was focused on like the potential impacts that biological AI poses, unlike digital AI, which does have broad economic concerns. There are bioethical concerns when using these kinds of systems, which for other people that might, or for people that might not know, it's when you're growing, for example, like a brain in a dish and then using it to like teaching it how to perform tasks. So it brings up questions of like, is this a conscious entity? So our approach is to reach out to legislators and work with them to figure out what needs to be done to establish the committee or the working group, and how to reach out to the relevant stakeholders and conduct the stakeholder analysis to identify what the needs would be for the framework, and then at that point work on finding solutions that are feasible and which address those needs. We didn't yet finish our timeline and milestones. Limitations are the feasibility of the bureaucracy of establishing a group like this in a short period of time. And our post-engagement plan involved monitoring new advancements in the field and ensuring that there are open channels for stakeholder feedback.
Very good. Well, that's impressive what you're able to do in that short time. And of course, you wouldn't be able to get to all the different sections, but hopefully that's a good start for you to think through this. And as I said, this is a good thought exercise if you're thinking about this for your policy write-up or your elevator pitch. It's a good way to think through these different aspects of policy questions. Can we get one more person?
I can speak for our group, but we didn't quite finish everything.
Okay, no problem. Go ahead, please.
We were group 11, and our scope was to increase childcare access for grad students and postdocs on campus. I know that at my university, the childcare for postdocs and grad students has been an issue lately. So we have a childcare facility on campus, but getting into there is really, really competitive with all the people that are trying to. So we were trying to either expand access or increase the budget for it. And so we were talking about like sending out a survey to trainees to gauge interest and need, and then just try to expand funding for childcare services and develop more accessible and affordable services on campus. But we were thinking that like the limitations would be competitive funding and institutional political challenges on campus and things like that, and limited resources like actual childcare people that would be able to actually be with the kids when people are on campus and everybody's schedules.
Very
And that's
good.
as far as we got in the time.
Very good. I was actually hoping somebody would speak from that group because I saw that your group was working on grad student issues. So thank you. Very important stuff. All right. Well, that's all we have for today. I won't keep you any longer, but hopefully you'll learn something. Feel free to reach out to us, and we'll keep you posted on the platform and everything that we're doing with Sigma Xi. We're all on social media and LinkedIn to get in touch. And then I don't know if Joanne has any closing remarks.
I'll catch them all on the email and Slack. So see you guys there. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Please send some thank yous and claps to our speakers today.
Thank you all.
Thank you. This is great.